It all began like any typical family gathering, but something felt distinctly wrong. I can still picture it, Sophie's birthday, a charming little celebration in our backyard. She had just turned 5. We had balloons floating about, a cake adorned with those ridiculously bright candles she adored, and Ethan, our 7-year-old, darting around like a kid who'd consumed too much sugar. The sun was shining, and everything should have been idyllic. But it wasn't. Megan, my wife, appeared distracted. You know that instinctual feeling when something's amiss, even if you can't pinpoint what it is? That was me all day long. A persistent sense of dread gnawed at me, like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff without knowing if I was about to plunge into the abyss or if the peril was merely a figment of my imagination. She was deep in conversation with Ryan, a coworker from her marketing job. Megan has always had a number of male friends, and I've never been the jealous type. But that particular day, during Sophie's party, something I couldn't shake off caught my attention. Ryan wasn't just chatting with her. They were exchanging glances, those fleeting looks that communicate more than words ever could. It was subtle, yet I noticed it. I'm good at picking up on things like that. I attempted to convince myself I was overreacting. Perhaps they were just sharing a laugh over some inside joke from work, or maybe they were merely good friends. But the way her body language changed when he leaned in made my stomach churn. All day long, I couldn't tear my gaze away from them. Megan wore a smile, but it wasn't the one reserved for me. It felt too intimate. It was unsettling. And the worst part? Ryan was leaning in just a tad too close, his gaze lingering a bit too long on her lips as she spoke. I kept questioning myself. Am I just being paranoid? Once everyone left and the kids were tucked into bed, I sank down with a beer, trying to brush it off. Yet, my mind wouldn't release its grip. Without a second thought, I grabbed her phone. I had never been one to snoop. I trusted her. Or at least I had, until that moment. And there it was, a message from Ryan. Last night was fun. We should do it again soon. Winky face. My heart plummeted. You know that sensation when your chest tightens. And for a fleeting moment, you question your understanding of reality? Yeah, that was me. I must have stared at that message for what felt like an eternity, fury bubbling up inside me. I marched straight to her. She was in the kitchen, pretending everything was fine, like she hadn't just shattered everything we had. Who the hell is Ryan? I demanded, waving her phone in the air. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Megan glanced at me, her face draining of color for a split second before she regained her icy composure. What the hell, Michael? You're invading my privacy now? She attempted to spin it like I was the irrational one, gaslighting me as she often did during arguments. It's nothing. You're just being paranoid. Ryan and I are only friends. I can't believe you're doing this. At Sophie's birthday party, no less. I wasn't buying it. Not this time. Friends don't send texts like this. What the hell does last night was fun mean, Megan? We stood there, locked in a heated stare, the tension palpable enough to slice through. I couldn't fathom how she was twisting the narrative to make me feel like the villain for uncovering the truth. My mind raced, memories of every late-night work function she'd attended, every unaccounted dinner, every instance she'd brush me off when I asked about her day. You're imagining things, Michael. Just stop being so insecure, she shot back. But her eyes betrayed her. They always did. I caught a flicker of something. Guilt, perhaps? Or fear. Either way, I knew I wasn't delusional. I realized I needed to confide in someone. This whole mess was consuming me, and I was lost as to what to believe anymore. That's when I reached out to Hannah. Hannah and I go way back. We've been friends since childhood, long before Megan entered the picture. She knew me better than anyone else, and for some reason, I felt like she'd get it. I didn't spill every detail over the phone. I simply said I needed to talk. She arrived at my house within the hour. Initially, it felt strange to lay everything out for her, but she listened as she always did. When I mentioned the text from Ryan, she didn't even blink. Instead, she gave me a look that suggested she knew something I didn't. "Michael," she said, leaning closer, "I've seen this kind of thing before. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is." Her words struck me hard. I wasn't losing my mind. Megan was hiding something, and I refused to let her manipulate me into thinking otherwise. Hannah offered to help me investigate. She suggested we keep an eye on Megan and figure out what she was up to when she wasn't home. I hesitated, unsure if it was the right move, but honestly, what did I have to lose at that point? The situation was spiraling out of control, and I needed answers. Hannah and I wasted no time. After our conversation, I felt like I was barely holding on. I needed clarity. I needed to witness the truth myself, to prove that my gnawing discomfort wasn't mere paranoia, that I wasn't losing my grip on reality. Hannah, always the practical one, proposed we discreetly follow Megan. We had to be cautious. Megan wasn't naive, and the last thing I needed was for her to catch wind of our plans. She was already trying to paint me as the paranoid one. I didn't want to give her any more ammunition. So, there we were, two grown adults parked across the street from Megan's office one night. Hannah was sitting next to me, her gaze fixed on the entrance like a hawk. It felt surreal, like we had stepped into some low-budget spy film. But this was my reality now, tailing my wife, trying to catch her in a lie. An hour passed, then another. Just as I was about to call it a night, Megan finally emerged. And she wasn't alone. Ryan was right there with her. My heart sank the moment I saw them together. They strolled side by side, chatting and laughing as if the world didn't exist beyond their little bubble. It was like I was invisible. "Follow them," Hannah whispered, her tone low as if we were about to catch them in some grand scheme. I didn't argue. We trailed behind them, keeping our distance to avoid raising suspicion. They eventually arrived at a small, upscale restaurant. One of those intimate spots with dim lighting, candles flickering on each table, and wine glasses that looked oversized for their own good. Too intimate. From the car, I watched as Ryan pulled out a chair for her, and Megan smiled. That same smile she used to reserve for me. The one that once made me feel invincible when we first started dating. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't sit there and watch this unfold. I turned to Hannah, who was observing everything as if she had seen it all 100 times before. "This is bullshit," I muttered, my voice quivering with barely contained fury. "How the hell did we end up here?" Hannah remained silent, but I could sense her sympathy. She'd been through something similar before. I knew that without her needing to say a word. The betrayal, the lies, the gradual dismantling of everything you thought was secure, it wasn't foreign to her. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, watching them order food, sip wine, and laugh like they were on some romantic rendezvous. I had never experienced such intense anger before, raw, unfiltered rage that burned deep within me. "I can't do this anymore." I finally broke the silence. "I need to confront her." Hannah nodded, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Are you sure? You need to be ready for whatever she might throw back at you." I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I couldn't keep living like this, lurking in the shadows of my own marriage, while Megan led a double life. So, we waited until they left, Megan and Ryan walking out as if nothing in the world could touch them. It made my stomach churn. By the time I arrived home, I was seething. My thoughts were a chaotic mess. Megan was already lounging on the couch, looking completely unfazed as if she hadn't just spent the evening out with another man. It was her casual demeanor that infuriated me the most. Like this was her new normal, and I was no longer a part of her life. "Where were you tonight?" I asked, not bothering to conceal the edge in my voice. Megan glanced up from her phone, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Out with friends." "What's with the interrogation?" I felt the anger bubbling up again. But this time, I refused to let her twist the situation. "Cut the crap, Megan. I followed you. I saw you with Ryan." Her expression shifted instantly. There it was again, that flicker of guilt. But instead of admitting her wrongdoing, she doubled down, just as I had anticipated. You followed me? Jesus, Michael. Do you even hear yourself? That's insane. You've lost it. I wasn't backing down. I saw you too at that restaurant, Megan. You can't keep lying to me. A long silence stretched between us, the kind that quickens your heartbeat because you know what's coming will change everything. She stood up slowly, crossing her arms as if trying to shield herself from the impending storm. Fine, she finally replied, her voice cold and detached. Yes, I've been spending time with Ryan, but it's not what you think. We're not, it's just, I've been lonely, Michael. You've been so consumed with work, the kids, everything but me. It was just emotional. It wasn't meant to go this far. Those words struck me like a gut punch. An emotional affair. She said it as if that somehow made it better, like it was less of a betrayal because they hadn't gone all the way. But to me, it was irrelevant. Whether physical or not, she had crossed a line, and there was no turning back from that. Just a fling? You're telling me this was just a fling? I spat, my voice rising. We never slept together, she retorted, as if that absolved her of anything. It was just, I don't know, I was confused. I'm sorry, but her apology felt hollow. There was no genuine remorse in her tone. She wasn't sorry for her actions. She was just sorry she got caught. The fight dragged on, feeling like hours. We hurled accusations back and forth. I called her every name I could think of, and she threw her own insults right back, accusing me of neglecting her, of not being the husband she needed. It was toxic, brutal. By the time it was over, I felt completely empty inside. That night, I crashed on the couch, unable to find any rest, my mind racing. Amid the chaos, Hannah stayed with me, even though I hadn't asked her to. We talked for hours, long after Megan had stormed off to bed. I don't know what to do, I admitted, staring up at the ceiling. It feels like my whole life is crumbling. Hannah nodded, her hand resting lightly on my arm. I've been there, Michael. It's not easy, but you'll get through this. We talked about the past, those old memories, and the people we used to be before life got so damn complicated. Hannah shared her own experiences of a failed relationship, revealing how she had been hurt before and how she truly understood the pain I was going through. As we spoke, an undeniable tension hung in the air, an unspoken bond that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. But it was there, and it wasn't going anywhere. After the explosive argument with Megan, the atmosphere between Hannah and me became quiet, too quiet. We continued to live under the same roof, going through the motions for the kids, but it felt like we were sitting on a ticking time bomb. Every conversation turned into a minefield, every glance loaded with resentment. I knew Megan was still seeing Ryan, and she was fully aware that I knew. But neither of us was ready to take that first step toward confrontation. Not yet. That's when Hannah suggested an idea. We were sitting in a cafe, the kind where nobody knows your name, and the coffee tastes like burnt toast. I was venting to her about my latest fight with Megan, another screaming match about trust, or the glaring lack thereof. You can't keep letting her walk all over you, Michael, Hannah said, her eyes narrowing with intensity. She's getting away with it, and she knows it. If you don't take action soon, it's going to eat you alive from the inside out. I nodded, completely feeling the weight of her words. But what am I supposed to do? She's already checked out. At this point, I might as well be a ghost in my own home. A slow smile crept across Hannah's face, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if she was serious or just messing with me. Make her jealous. She leaned in closer, her voice conspiratorial. Show her that you can move on, too. I stared at her, incredulous. And how do you propose I do that? I'm not the one running around with a coworker. That's where I come in, Hannah replied, her tone playful yet determined. We'll stage it. Something public. Somewhere she can't possibly avoid seeing us together. It'll drive her absolutely mad. At first, I thought she was joking. But the more I considered it, the more the idea appealed to me. Megan had played me for a fool. and I was tired of feeling powerless. I wanted her to experience the hurt that I was feeling. I wanted her to know what it was like to lose something you thought you held securely. We spent the next hour hashing out the details. There was a charity gala coming up in a few weeks, something Megan had been excited about for months. It was one of those fancy events where everyone was expected to show up looking like they had their lives completely together. Megan and I were both supposed to attend, putting on a facade of a happy couple for the sake of appearances. "That's where we do it," Hannah said, her eyes lighting up as the plan came together. "We'll make sure she sees us together. We'll flirt, laugh, and let her watch. I bet she'll lose her mind." It was risky. I understood that. But at this point, what did I really have to lose? The night of the gala arrived quicker than I anticipated. Megan was in full prep mode, trying on dresses and ensuring everything was perfect. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was brief and curt, like she was just checking off a to-do list. I played along, pretending to care about the event as much as she did, but all I could think about was what was going to unfold that night. Hannah and I had meticulously planned everything. We arrived separately, but not too far apart. The venue was one of those massive ballrooms, chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, couples in tuxedos and gowns sipping champagne. It was the kind of place where people came to see and be seen. I spotted Megan almost immediately. She was wearing a sleek black dress, her hair styled just the way she always did when she wanted to impress. And then I saw Ryan standing right next to her, looking every bit the smarmy jerk he was. Just seeing him there made my blood boil, but I managed to keep my composure. Hannah appeared at my side, looking stunning in a deep red dress that hugged her curves perfectly. She smiled at me, that knowing look in her eyes signaling, "Let's do this." We navigated through the crowd, pausing to chat with acquaintances, but always ensuring we were close enough for Megan to notice. And she did. I could see her eyes darting over to us, narrowing slightly as Hannah and I laughed a little too loudly, our bodies just a bit too close. I made sure to keep my hand on Hannah's back, guiding her through the room just like I used to with Megan. It didn't take long for Megan to catch on. I noticed her glance my way from across the room, her smile faltering for a brief moment before she returned to her conversation with Ryan. But by then it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. As the evening progressed, I made it even more obvious. Hannah and I danced together, her body pressed against mine, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Megan watched from the sidelines, her expression tightening with each passing minute. It was working. By the end of the night, I could see the cracks forming in Megan's facade. She was trying to play it cool, but I knew better. I could read her like a book. When she finally couldn't hold it together any longer, she stormed out of the ballroom, leaving Ryan standing there, looking bewildered. But the night didn't end there. The real twist unfolded after the gala, when Hannah and I found ourselves outside in the parking lot, away from the prying eyes of the partygoers. We were both riding high on the adrenaline of the evening, exhilarated by the game we had just played. "I think that worked," I said, my voice low, a triumphant grin spreading across my face. Hannah chuckled softly, her eyes sparkling. "Oh," she was furious. "Did you catch her expression while we were dancing?" As we stood there, the cool night air wrapped around us. The tension that had been building between us for weeks finally erupted. Without a second thought, I drew Hannah closer, and our lips collided in a passionate kiss that felt like the climax of everything we'd endured. One thing led to another, and suddenly, we were tangled up in the back seat of my car, lost in a whirlwind of desire. It was messy, raw, and exactly what I needed in that moment. A release from all the anger, betrayal, and confusion that had consumed me. For that fleeting moment, nothing else mattered but the two of us. Afterward, we lay there, breathing heavily, the windows fogged from the intensity of our encounter. I felt a rush of exhilaration, as if I had reclaimed control over my life. But alongside that thrill, guilt gnawed at my insides. This was no longer just about revenge. Things had become far more complicated. I didn't see that coming. I finally admitted, breaking the silence. Hannah turned to me, a small, knowing smile on her lips. Neither did I. But I guess plans have a way of going sideways, don't they? She was spot on. Nothing was unfolding as I had anticipated. I shouldn't have been surprised by Megan's swift reaction, but I was. The morning after the gala, the tension was palpable before she even spoke. Megan stood in the kitchen, staring blankly into her coffee as if it held the solutions to her chaotic thoughts. I could sense the storm brewing. She had seen enough last night to set her off. But this time, I was ready for her. "Do you have something to tell me, Michael?" she asked, her voice unnaturally calm. Too calm. I took a sip of my coffee, feigning ignorance to the brewing storm in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" She slammed her mug onto the counter, the sound sharp and echoing in the otherwise quiet house. "Don't play games with me. I saw you with her last night. You really think I didn't notice you flirting with Hannah? Right in front of everyone." I set my cup down deliberately, my heart racing as I recognized the path this was taking. I was done being her puppet. And so what if I was? What about you and Ryan? You think I'm clueless about what's happening between you two? That hit home. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw her caught off guard. But Megan was always quick to regain her footing. "Don't flip this around on me," she shot back, her tone sharp. "You've been acting like a total jerk lately, sneaking around, God knows where. And now, at the gala, you're all over Hannah as if you don't care who sees." My anger surged again, but this time I wasn't going to hold back. I refused to let her cast me as the villain. "I followed you, Megan. I saw you with Ryan at that restaurant, laughing and touching him like I didn't even exist. You've been having an affair, so don't pretend to be the victim here." Her face paled, the color draining from her cheeks. For once, she didn't have a quick retort. She just stood there, her breath coming in quick bursts, as if I had knocked the wind out of her. "That's not the same," she finally said, her voice quiet but laced with barely contained fury. "Ryan and I, it wasn't like that. Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around for weeks, and you think I'm the bad guy for dancing with Hannah? You've been cheating on me, Megan. Can't you see that?" Tears filled her eyes, but I couldn't tell if it was guilt or just her usual manipulation. Megan knew how to play the victim when it suited her. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "But I never—" "Stop right there," I interrupted, cutting her off. "I don't care if you slept with him or not. You betrayed me. You've been lying to me, and I'm done." Megan looked like she was on the verge of breaking down, but I felt no sympathy left. I had given her every chance to come clean, and instead, she had tried to twist my reality. I wasn't going to let her do that again. The damage was already done. Things at home quickly spiraled out of control after that explosive confrontation. It didn't take long for Ethan and Sophie to sense that something was off. Kids are incredibly perceptive like that. No matter how hard I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, the tension between Megan and me was impossible to disguise. One night, after yet another argument, this time quieter but no less brutal, I stepped into the hallway and spotted Ethan standing there, his eyes wide as he looked between us. He didn't say a word. He just stared, trying to process the chaos unfolding around him. "Dad," Ethan asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Why are you and Mom always fighting?" I froze, my heart shattering at the sight of him, standing there, confused and frightened. Sophie appeared behind him, clutching her stuffed bunny, her wide eyes mirroring Ethan's bewilderment. I forced a smile, trying to reassure them, but it felt hollow. "It's okay, buddy. Sometimes grown-ups argue, but everything's fine." But it wasn't fine, not even close, and I loathed that they were caught in the crossfire of our mess. Megan had already vanished upstairs without a word, leaving me to pick up the pieces. I knelt down and pulled both Ethan and Sophie into a tight embrace. I'm sorry, guys. I promise I'll figure this out. But what was there to figure out? I couldn't bear to be in the same room as Megan, let alone pretend that everything was okay. The worst part? I wasn't even sure what I wanted anymore. The only thing keeping me anchored in this storm was Hannah. Our affair hadn't ended after that night in the car. If anything, it had intensified. We stole moments together whenever we could, secret dinners, fleeting encounters, always careful to leave no trace behind. Yet, as much as I tried to lose myself in the thrill, the guilt gnawed at me relentlessly. Every time I looked at Ethan or Sophie, the weight of my actions crushed me further. They didn't deserve this chaos. None of it. But every time I attempted to end things with Hannah, I found myself unable to do so. It was as if I needed her, the escape she offered from the nightmare my life had become. One night, as we lay intertwined in bed, the guilt finally bubbled to the surface. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, I confessed, staring at the ceiling. It feels like I'm losing everything. Hannah turned to face me, her expression a mix of concern and seriousness. You're not losing anything, Michael. You're gaining your freedom. Megan has been dragging you down for years, and you deserve happiness. Her words were soothing, but they didn't erase the ache in my heart. But what about Ethan and Sophie? I'm ruining their lives. You're not, Hannah insisted, her hand resting on my chest. You're doing what you need to do. Kids are resilient. They'll understand eventually. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to convince myself that what we were doing wasn't selfish, that it was just me taking control of my life. But deep down, I knew it was more complex than that. I was playing with fire, and sooner or later, everything would ignite. I realized I couldn't keep dodging the inevitable. Ryan loomed like a dark shadow in my life, and I felt a deep-seated urge to confront him directly. I needed to see the man who had shattered my marriage face to face, to expose him for who he truly was. Whether I was doing it for myself, for Megan, or for some misguided sense of justice didn't matter. It had to happen. Tracking him down didn't take much effort. Social media made it too easy. I sent him a message, requesting a meeting. He probably thought it was about some work-related issue, maybe something Megan had mentioned. But my intentions were far more serious. We met at a park, the kind where kids laughed and played, parents pushed strollers, and the smell of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air. It was the last place anyone would expect a confrontation, which was precisely why I chose it. I wanted witnesses. I wanted him to squirm under the public gaze. I spotted him before he noticed me. Ryan stood by the fountain, scanning the area like he was awaiting an old friend. His arrogance, even in casual attire, made my skin crawl. I approached him, and when he finally saw me, his smile faltered. "Michael," he said, attempting to sound casual. "Didn't expect to see you here. What's this about?" I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I got right to the point. "You know damn well what this is about," I said, my voice low but steady. "You've been sleeping with my wife." His expression froze, and for a fleeting moment, I saw panic flash in his eyes. He tried to recover, plastering on that smug grin of his. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me," I snapped, taking a step closer. "I've seen the messages. I've noticed the way you look at her. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you're innocent." People were beginning to take notice. A few joggers slowed their pace, and parents nearby cast curious glances in our direction, likely wondering what drama was unfolding. But I didn't care. Let them see. Let them hear every word. "Look," Ryan raised his hands defensively. Nothing happened. Megan and I were just talking. She was unhappy, and we... "Don't," I growled, cutting him off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I know what went down. I'm here to make you look me in the eye and admit it. Admit what you did." His eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was none. Not here, not in front of witnesses. Fine, he muttered finally, his voice barely audible. I messed up. We had something, but it wasn't serious. My blood boiled at his dismissive tone. He spoke as if it were nothing, as if my entire marriage was just some casual fling he could shrug off. Not serious? I repeated, my voice shaking with fury. You think you can walk away from this like it doesn't matter? You've destroyed everything. By now, a small crowd had gathered, watching the scene unfold before them. Ryan's complexion had turned crimson, and for the first time, I detected genuine fear in his eyes. He wasn't the arrogant jerk I had envisioned. He was just a scared man caught in a web of his own making. I'm sorry, he stammered, his voice trembling. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You didn't mean for it to? I shot back, my fists clenched tightly at my sides. Well, it did, and now you're going to face the consequences. Before I could continue, I caught sight of her. Megan stood at the edge of the park, her face pale and her eyes wide with disbelief. She must have sensed the tension and rushed over to intervene, but it was too late. The ride home was shrouded in silence. The air between us felt thick with all the words left unspoken, each of us trapped in our own thoughts. Once inside, Megan sank onto the sofa, her hands shaking uncontrollably. I remained standing, watching her, waiting for the inevitable emotional outpouring. It didn't take long. She began to sob deep, anguished cries that reverberated through the room. I wanted to feel something, anger, relief, any emotion at all, but all I felt was exhaustion. I'm so sorry, she cried, her voice barely coherent through the tears. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I simply stared at her. Then why? I finally asked, my tone softer than I intended. Why did you do it? Megan buried her face in her hands, her confession pouring out in broken phrases. I don't know. I was lonely. I felt invisible. You were always caught up in work and the kids. I just felt like I didn't matter anymore. Then Ryan came along, and he made me feel valued. I know it's no excuse, but I was desperate. Her admission struck me harder than I expected. I had braced for anger, for another round of accusations, but this was different. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was utterly defeated. And despite everything, a small part of me yearned to comfort her, to tell her that I understood her pain. But I couldn't allow myself to do that. Do you think I wasn't lonely? I asked, my voice trembling. Do you think I didn't feel the same way? But I didn't turn to someone else. I stayed and tried to make things work. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I messed up, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, Michael, don't leave me. I can't go through this alone. Her plea hit me hard like a punch to the gut. She was asking for something I was unsure I could give. Forgiveness? A second chance? After everything we'd been through? But I couldn't give her what she wanted. Not anymore. The final confrontation took place later that night. The kids were tucked away in bed, and the house was steeped in an eerie silence. We stood in the living room, facing each other, the weight of our shared history pressing down on us. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm done, Megan. I can't keep living like this. She looked at me, desperation written all over her face. You don't really mean that. I do, I asserted, my tone firmer this time. We've been crumbling for years. Maybe this affair was just the final nail in the coffin, but we were broken long before Ryan came into the picture. I don't know when it happened, but it did. I can't keep pretending. Megan sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Please, Michael, I'll do anything. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can... No, I interrupted, shaking my head. It's over. I'm not doing this for you or for me. I'm doing it for the kids. They deserve better than this. Better than us. She was shattered, completely broken. But I couldn't be her savior. Not this time. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart racing in my chest. As I reached the door, I noticed Hannah standing just outside, watching silently. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence spoke volumes. I didn't know what the future held, but I was certain of one thing. This chapter of my life was closing for good. The house felt hauntingly silent after Megan left. The finality of it washed over me in waves. The first night alone was the hardest. Every corner of the house echoed with memories of our life together, both good and bad. Yet those memories didn't carry the weight they once did. They felt distant, like echoes of a past I was gradually letting go of. I focused on spending more quality time with Ethan and Sophie, making a conscious effort to keep things normal for them, even though everything felt upside down. We visited the park, had movie nights, and I even tried my hand at cooking their favorite meals. For the first time in ages, I was fully present. It wasn't easy. Each time I tucked them in at night, guilt nagged at me for the upheaval they were facing. But I knew this was better than the toxic atmosphere Megan and I had created. I try not to dwell on Hannah too much, but that was a losing battle. After everything, she had become an unexpected fixture in my life. What had started as a scheme for revenge had transformed into something neither of us anticipated. She had been my anchor amid the storm, and I couldn't overlook how our connection had deepened. But now that the chaos had settled, I found myself questioning what lay ahead. One afternoon, we met at a cafe, the same spot where we concocted that wild plan to make Megan jealous. It felt surreal to be back there, now burdened with the weight of what had transpired between us. We sat outside, sipping our coffees, the air thick with unspoken tension, as if an invisible presence sat between us. "I've been thinking," I began, breaking the silence that stretched on, "about what's next for us." Hannah met my gaze, her eyes searching mine for answers. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that too." The truth hit hard. Things had become more complicated than I had ever expected. What began as an escape, a way to reclaim my autonomy, had evolved into something real. But now that the dust had settled, I wasn't sure I was ready to confront what that meant. "Do you regret it?" Hannah asked, her voice soft yet steady. I shook my head. "No, I don't regret it. I needed you, Hannah. I honestly don't know how I would have navigated all of this without you." Her expression softened, but I could see the tension flicker in her eyes. But, I sighed. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for more." "Not yet." Those words hung heavy in the air, but they were honest. I wasn't ready. My life felt like a jigsaw puzzle tossed into the air, and the last thing I wanted was to pull Hannah deeper into the chaos. I cared about her, perhaps more than I was willing to admit, but that didn't mean I was prepared to begin a new chapter. "I understand," she replied, her voice calm but tinged with sadness. "I didn't expect you to have everything figured out right now. But I need to know, is this just about you not being ready? Or is there something more at play?" I didn't have a clear answer for her. Perhaps it was a mix of both. Maybe it was guilt over moving on too quickly, or maybe it was the uncertainty of whether what we had was genuine or simply a product of the turmoil around us. "I don't know," I admitted. I need to focus on the kids for now, on rebuilding my life. I don't want to hurt you, Hannah." She nodded, looking down at her cup. "I get it. I truly do. But I also don't want to be someone's second choice. I don't want to be the person you turn to just for comfort." The truth in her words stung. She was right. As much as I wanted to deny it, there was a part of me that had been leaning on her to fill the void left by Megan. But Hannah deserved more than that. She deserved to be pursued for her own worth, not as a mere distraction from my pain. "I care about you, Hannah," I said quietly. "I really do. But we both know this wasn't built to last." She held my gaze for what felt like an eternity, and I could see the disappointment flicker in her eyes. But there was also an understanding. "Yeah," she said softly, "I think you're right." In the days that followed, I spent a lot of time in introspection. I realized the person I needed to focus on the most wasn't Hannah or even Megan. It was me. I needed to rebuild myself, and figure out who I was beyond the wreckage of my marriage. I had to be the father Ethan and Sophie deserved, even if it meant hitting pause on everything else. I stayed in touch with Hannah, but the dynamic between us had shifted. We both understood it couldn't remain the same after everything that had transpired. Our split wasn't dramatic. It was more of a quiet acknowledgement that what we shared was born out of circumstance, not something sustainable. There was a sense of peace in that realization. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I was no longer shackled by the burden of my failing marriage or the guilt of the affair. I was free to focus on what truly mattered, healing and being there for my kids. One evening, as I sat with Ethan and Sophie, watching a movie they had picked out, it dawned on me that this was what truly mattered. This was where I needed to be. It wasn't about revenge or proving something to Megan anymore. It wasn't about finding someone new. It was about rediscovering myself, being the kind of father they could rely on, and learning to live with the scars without allowing them to define me. I didn't know what the future held, but for now, that was enough.